Ready to go. Welcome everyone to the SMLCA 2022 virtual gross floor area town hall. And we want to thank you for choosing to spend part of your evening with us tonight. And we'll be starting in a couple of minutes, but I'll just go through a couple of things before that, just to make sure. We want to wait a few more minutes to make sure we have the majority logged on, but we're doing well at this point. To get the word out to all landowners, we've leveraged the echoes, which gets mailed to all landowners, regardless of whether they're members of the association or not. We've also used our email communications, our website, and Facebook to try and reach the highest number of landowners possible. And we're proud to say we've managed to get 322 landowners to register out of a total of 782, which represents about 41%. That's no easy feat when you consider we're discussing something as exciting as gross floor area. So I think at this point, we'll start the meeting with a land acknowledgement, and Bernie will do that for us. Bernie Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Harold. This is something that's new for us in particular, but I know it's done in most business settings now. So let's go with it. Land acknowledgement. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to attend this important town hall meeting. Let us start with the land acknowledgement. Let us acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional ancestral territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, specifically the Ojibwe Nation, and the Huron-Wendat Nation, and now includes communities from the Wata, Mohawk peoples, and the Métis Nations of Ontario. This is now home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. This territory is covered by the Williams Treaty of 1923.
Harold, you're muted. If you can unmute yourself.
Got it. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to begin with an introduction of our board and panelists. I'm Harold Toiviainen. I'm the president of the SMLCA. The rest of the board includes Denise Edwards, Rick Josak, Ted Mackay, Bernie Mitchell, Craig Cameron, Lib Gibson, and Brian Ingham. We're also joined by Frank Boddy, who is our past president, and Victoria Lemieux, who's a professional planning consultant, and she's here to help interpret the survey and provide options for consideration to the community. Victoria comes to us with a wealth of planning experience. She's particularly that of former director of planning for Georgian Bay Township. Next slide. Thank you. We're also joined tonight by our mayor, Peter Coetzee, local councillor Brian Bocek, district councillor Paul Wianco, and we're also proud to say we're joined by Dr. Christopher Apsala, the Georgian Bay Director of Planning. Welcome and thanks for giving us your time tonight. Excuse me, sorry. Many hours have gone into planning this event. A while back, we formed a gross floor area committee comprised of Rick Josak, Bernie Mitchell, Frank Boddy, and myself. I'd like to thank my fellow committee members for their support and hard work. Also, a special thanks go to Sarah McKinney, who helped with registration, Denise Edwards for communications, and Steve Vine, who's acting as our moderator tonight. And he's responsible for the voting and the tech support. Our town hall is planned to run until 9 p.m. And we've set timing for each of the sections so that we can leave enough time for you to ask Victoria questions. We'll do our best to get through all of the questions and try to let everyone have a chance to ask a question. If we cannot cover every question, we'll get back to you in the next few days after the meeting. Rest assured your voice will be heard. All questions and comments will be included when we send the results to the township. Before we get started, though, we'd like to go through some general housekeeping items to make sure we have a smooth meeting and so that you know what to expect. First off, this meeting will be recorded and will be made available to everyone on our website tomorrow. Our board members and guests have joined us as panelists, and you'll be able to see and hear them. All of you, the 6 Mile Lake landowners, have joined as attendees, which means you'll be able to see and hear all the panelists, but your cameras and mics have been turned off. This means that no one will be able to see or hear you. If you have a question at any time through the meeting, please use the Q&A button that's located at the bottom of the screen. All you need to do is type your question and submit it. The moderator, Steve, will be queuing questions to be addressed and will endeavor to let everyone who wishes to ask a question. When your question is being answered by Victoria, you'll have the ability to unmute your microphone so you can speak if need be. Please try and limit your questions to 2 minutes so that we can let everyone have a chance to speak. The moderator will let you know when your time is up. Also, just a quick reminder that Victoria cannot speak to your specific planning queries in regards to past or present variance requests with the township. Those questions really need to be dealt with the township outside of this meeting. Okay, so we've already gone through the land acknowledgement, introduction of the board, introduction of the planning consultant, township guests, and the GFA committee, along with the procedural statements. Next up, we'll go through the background and objective statements, town hall objectives, voting overview, presentation of the options, other considerations to the official plan and bylaw. Then we'll move on to an open discussion with Victoria Lemieux, where you can ask her questions to better understand the implications of these options. Finally, we'll conclude with the adjournment. Steve, over to you for voting overview.
Thank you, Harold. The voting is going to be similar to the past 2 years that we've done with using Election Buddy. You, after the meeting, are going to receive an invitation from Election Buddy that is going to appear as though it's coming from the 6 Mile Lake Cottagers Association. The voting is going to open tonight, and it'll be open for 2 weeks until May 11th at 8 o'clock. It's been left open this long to allow everyone to digest the material and provide your vote with an informed background. The survey has 2 parts. The first part consists of 3 options, which we will be discussing during this meeting. And in each case, you can either accept the option or not accept the option. You can indicate you are uncertain and need more information, or you can abstain from voting. For each option, you are not voting on aggregate. You can vote for each option individually if you like. They're not mutually exclusive. In part 2, part 2 consists of 3 other considerations. You can either agree with the recommendation or disagree with the recommendation. Again, you can indicate you are uncertain and you need more information, or you can abstain from voting. When you get your email, you'll click on the link in the email, which is personalized just for you. This will take you to the Election Buddy platform for you to cast your vote. Once you've made your selections, you'll click on the Submit button, where you will get a chance to confirm your voting preferences. And once you submit your voting preferences, you'll get an email that will confirm that you have cast your vote. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the link provided in the email, which will be 6mile, that's the number 6mile at the number 6mile.ca. So 6mile at 6mile.ca. And we'll try to help you as best you can. As the moderator, I will have access to the results of the survey once the survey is complete and not until then. And then I will share the results with the board for the board to share them with you.
Okay, over to objectives with Bernie, please.
Okay. So our objectives tonight, we're hoping to better understand the will of the 6 Mile Lake landowners in regards to the GFA. The options that Victoria will take you through this evening are aimed at addressing the feedback of the 2019 survey, leveraging also the input from the brainstorming sessions held late last year. So we'd like to ask everyone to have an open mind, ask questions, seek clarification so that you can feel confident in responding to the follow-up survey, which will remain open for 2 weeks after the meeting, as already mentioned. And we'd like you to listen to each other, treat each other with open kindness, respect, dignity, and care. And that, just a reminder, that's our values that we agreed to at the last AGM. Okay. So a bit about the background. Development on 6 Mile Lake is something that will happen whether we like it or not, especially as many of the older cabin-like cottages are getting sold by the now aged owners and redeveloped into full-sized year-round homes. When the zoning bylaw was rewritten in 2014, several changes were made to the definition of gross floor allowance, which governs the square footage you're allowed to build. These changes were implemented to close loopholes that were used for increasing living space. The use of areas that were exempt from the GFA size restrictions because they were designated for a particular purpose considered non-habitable could not be regulated. For example, an area designated for storage might later be converted as living space. A consequence of closing these loopholes was that this effectively reduced the allowable size of a dwelling, in some cases necessitating an expensive variance process at the Committee of Adjustments for a building that previously would have fit within the guidelines. This has created considerable discord with some landowners on the lake, and in 2019 survey indicated the GFA restrictions needed to be relaxed. The township has asked for our input as they plan on revising the official plan and zoning bylaw in 2022. And to that, we need to get input from our 6 Mile Lake landowners to better understand how much the GFA restrictions should be relaxed.
Over to Rick for an overview of the survey results. Rick?
Great, thank you, Harold. Good evening, everybody. Yes, you've heard reference to the 2019 survey a couple of times now. We did think it'd be useful to just briefly highlight some of the major questions that relate to tonight's meeting. Question 9 asked how respondents felt about the rules establishing a maximum GFA on 6 Mile Lake, and the responses were quite evenly distributed. As a result, this question didn't provide any guidance with respect to what should or shouldn't be done about the GFA limits. However, what we don't know is how the response to this question would change if some or all basements, screen porches, outside covered areas, and attached garages were removed from the GFA calculation. Question 6 asked how respondents felt about areas of a dwelling that are included in the current GFA definition. And just over half felt the definition was too restrictive, which indicates the need for a more lenient definition of GFA, which is underscored by the responses to 2 other questions, number 10 and 12. Question 10 asked if respondents felt the GFA definition should include all basement/cellar spaces with a ceiling height greater than 1.8 meters or 5 feet 11 inches. And 61% felt that basements should be removed. Questions arise about what is meant by the term basement. Was it the traditional below ground cellar, or is it the above ground walkout basement that is more prominent? It is noteworthy that before the GFA definition was last changed in 2014, basements were included in GFA, but there was an allowance for utility and storage space. Question 11 asked respondents if spaces such as porches, screen porches, sunrooms, and any attached structure, such as a garage, should be included in the GFA definition. 55% of respondents believe that covered spaces should be removed from the GFA definition, while roughly the other half, or 43%, felt they should remain. Again, this provides no real direction for adjusting the definition. Question 12 asked respondents if they felt that the GFA definition should include exterior covered entrances and spaces under a roof overhang of 1.2 meters or 3 feet 11 inches or more. 71% felt the GFA definition should not include exterior covered entrances and spaces under a roof overhang. Question 7 asked respondents' opinion on the GFA cap for larger lots, which is 275 square meters. That's equivalent to 2,960 square feet, or 5% of the lot area, whichever is more restrictive. 53% believe the current 275 square meters cap is too restrictive for larger lots, compared with 35% who believe it is appropriate as is. It would be interesting to find out whether they would feel the same way if some or all basements, screen porches, covered walkways, and attached garages were removed from the GFA calculation. And the last one I'm referring to, question 8, asked respondents' opinion on the GFA cap for smaller lots, which is currently 190 square meters. That's equivalent to 2,045 square feet. And 48% believe the GFA cap on smaller lots is too restrictive versus 43% who believed it is appropriate. Therefore, there is nothing really definitive you could say one way or the other. So that's just a brief overview of the 2019 survey results. Harold, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the official plan, because this is basically the backbone of the 6 Mile Lake, the plans from the official plan that apply to 6 Mile Lake. Located within the Georgian Bay official plan is the 6 Mile Lake Waterfront Community Plan. And as we've said, development at 6 Mile Lake is going to happen whether we like it or not. The township has recognized that fact and consequently has come up with policies to control that development. One of the key features of the 6 Mile Lake Community Plan is character. And you see this word character, if you read through it, repeated often. This word character is worthy of note because it speaks to the question, how do you want 6 Mile Lake to look in the future? Do you want the 6 Mile Lake of the future to more or less reflect the character that it has now? Or do we want the character to change? People have told me that they don't want the lake to become another Lake Joseph, Rosso, or Muskoka. And I think that's the crux of the issue here. So here's a breakdown. I'm going to read through some of these excerpts from the lake plan, and we'll see the main features that are found within. First of all, lake quality. The waterfront is a unique recreational resource and land and water asset, and as such, the limited development permitted should enhance and protect these natural heritage qualities which contribute to the attraction of the waterfront designation. It's important to protect our recreational water quality. Recreational water quality on 6 Mile Lake will be maintained and enhanced through appropriate land use regulations affecting both new and existing development. An emerging stewardship ethic for shorelands will include landscape naturalization and on-site retention and treatment of pollutants. Next up, character. The character of the 6 Mile Lake waterfront community is of a residential community composed of distinct neighborhoods focused on various basins in the lake. It consists of many islands and mainland uses with a variety of access needs. This character shall be maintained and enhanced through careful land use planning. Visual impact. This is an important one. Development will have regard to the aesthetic quality of the waterfront area and be compatible with existing land uses in the area. Land use planning policies should protect the natural heritage and aesthetic integrity of 6 Mile Lake while accommodating a limited amount of new development. The visual impact of development from the water is an important parameter in maintaining the character of the lake. The size of a dwelling combined with its location on a site will have a direct effect on the visual impact of the development. As such, the zoning bylaw will provide standards to regulate dwelling size to avoid overly large cottages on the lake. Cottage size may be regulated through a combination of restrictions on total footprint, floor area, which is GFA, width or height, combined with setback and landscaping considerations. Finally, natural heritage. The redevelopment of existing properties on the lake will conform to the policies of this official plan and address matters which will include but are not limited to the natural heritage features and areas, cultural heritage areas of use limitation, and general waterfront designation policies. These policies essentially focus on preserving the character of the lake by dealing with visual impact and environmental concerns. So what we're going to do is just take a deeper dive into visual impact. Next slide, please. There we go. Visual impact applies to the preservation of the natural character of the lake. In other words, it's what you see when you view your property from the water. Some of the things that aggravate visual impact are the fact that we have many older cottages that already exist near the shoreline. And when they are rebuilt, larger ones get built in their place. And this term is known as grandfathering, and we'll be talking about that probably quite a bit tonight. The second thing that aggravates visual impact is lack of trees and vegetation between the cottage and the shoreline. This is a particular challenge on our lake because of the amount of exposed rock that we have. Thirdly, larger buildings on narrow lots. This is why the zoning bylaw limits building width. But visual impact can be mitigated by moving the dwelling further back from the shoreline, planting trees and bushes, and limiting the apparent width and height of a dwelling. Next slide. We're going to look at environmental concerns as well. I'm going to read an excerpt from a year 2000 government document called Extension Notes. And basically, it talks about how dwelling size impacts the usage and clearing of the area in front of the dwelling, including the shoreline itself. I quote, 90% of all lake life is born, raised, and fed in the area where land and water meet. The shallow water and the first 10 to 15 meters of shoreland forms a ribbon of life around lakes and rivers that is essential to the survival of many species. This rich and complex habitat supports plants, microorganisms, insects, amphibians, birds, mammals, and fish. Unaware of the importance of shoreline vegetation, many landowners clear their shorelines and transform them into urban landscapes. They destroy the cattails, bulrushes, and other native species and replace them with lawns and non-native species. They also build retaining walls, docks, and boathouses. These changes destroy the balance of the aquatic and shoreline ecosystems. They also alter the wildlife habitat, natural beauty, and character of our lakes and rivers, end quote. Phosphorus is an essential building block for plant life, and this is really important. It comes from human waste, animal waste, decomposition of vegetation. It's one of the key ingredients in fertilizer. And I want to underline this. Septic tanks do not get rid of phosphorus. It flows downhill from the bed, and some of it is consumed by plant life. The rest finds its way to the lake. Storm runoff also washes phosphorus from the land into the lake. The problem with our region is that there's very little soil to absorb this phosphorus from septic beds because phosphorus is a fertilizer. It encourages lake weed and algae growth. Toxic blue-green algae blooms are increasingly becoming a concern for shoreline landowners in our region. All of these changes in water quality can lead to rapid eutrophication, and that means the aging of a lake, which ultimately changes the kinds of numbers and species that can live in the lake. Next slide, please. So having gone through some of the background materials to help you understand our current state, we'll now turn it over to Victoria Lemieux. As we mentioned, the 2019 landowner survey indicated that the rules regarding GFA should be relaxed. It's equally important that any changes proposed be consistent with the policies found within the 6 Mile Lake Community Plan. Victoria is a senior planner at Morgan and Associates and developed some options for our consideration. So we'll turn it over to you, Victoria.
Thanks, Harold, and good evening, everyone. Just to quickly begin, as many of you are aware, I'm sure I spoke with many of those in attendance during my tenure at the township, but for those who may not be as familiar with me, I was previously employed at the township. And during this time, I handled a number of Planning Act applications within the 6 Mile Lake community area, as well as, of course, reviewed literally hundreds of building permits applications from a zoning perspective throughout the entirety of the township during my tenure. I am grateful that I have been asked by the association to have participated in the brainstorming session back in 2021 and also be in attendance this evening to assist with tonight's meeting. So to begin, I will be providing an overview of 3 options that we are presenting this evening. Additionally, these options also include a proposed housekeeping change housekeeping modification to 2 existing policies in the official plan, which I will go to in further detail at the end of the options. So as you can see on the slide in front of you, the first option that we would like to discuss this evening focuses solely on the gross floor area numerical limit itself. So this option would result in an increase approximately 25% to the existing dwelling limits on 6 Mile Lake. So a number of you might be asking, where does this 25% value come from? And really through this brainstorming session process, it was determined that an average of variance applications that were sought from, I believe, approximately 2016 to 2017 to most recently, had an approximate average request of about 25% of what was permitted. So that was kind of the starting point for our discussion, and that is why the first option in front of you this evening speaks to an increase of 25%. On the table here on the slide, you can see that it provides the current GFA limit and then what the new GFA limit would be for lots both under an acre and over an acre with the 25% increase proposed. So as you can see here, if you have a property that is less than an acre or under 4,000 square meters in size, currently your GFA limit would be 190 square meters. The 25% increase would push you up to 238 square meters or approximately 2,550 square feet. For lots greater than an acre, the current maximum gross floor area limit is 275 square meters or 5% of your total lot area, whichever one is more restrictive. This option would seek to increase that limit to 344 square meters, or approximately 3,700 square feet, or 6% of your total lot area, whichever one is more restrictive. Next slide, please. So we did our best to try and add some different visualizations of what we're proposing here, just to aid those who might think more visually than just looking at some straight numbers. So as you can see here on the left side of the screen, we've provided two diagrams that would illustrate what a current property that has an area of 0.9 acres in size. So currently, the gray area would represent what your maximum gross floor area limit would be, whether if it's a one-story structure or a two-story structure. And then the provided dashed line would indicate essentially what that new gross floor area limit would be under the proposed increase of 25%. So then, excuse me, so then further trying to think about this from a visual perspective, a great kind of indicator of what you could achieve with this proposed gross floor increase. We look towards a typical bedroom size, for instance, that would be, 12 by 12 feet. I know, for instance, my master bedroom is approximately 12 by 12. It's not the biggest bedroom in the world, but it is a substantial size that I believe that most people can visually understand that impact. So in this proposal, just for an example, if your lot was less than 1 acre in total size, you would be able to essentially add the equivalent of about 3.5 bedrooms of that size. And then if you had a lot that was greater than 1 acre, you would be able to add approximately 5 rooms of that size to your existing dwelling. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so the second option that we want to discuss this evening relates solely to modifying the actual definition of gross floor area itself. So as it was previously mentioned by members of the board, and I won't get into details of the changes that happened in 2014 as they've been previously mentioned, but currently the gross floor area definition does include areas such as unenclosed porches, roof overhangs, and attached garages. So the proposal under this option would essentially remove those areas from being contemplated under the gross floor area maximum, as well as only consider up to 75% of a walkout basement as gross floor area. So of course, this option essentially would result in a lake-specific gross floor area definition. And just for some context, currently the zoning bylaw does have a community-specific gross floor area definition that applies to other areas of the municipality, being Cognachine and Go Home Lake. So essentially, this would add an additional gross floor area definition that would only apply to 6 Mile Lake. Next slide, please. So then looking at the third option, it's essentially a hybrid of option 1 and 2. So this would result in both a increase to the gross floor area limit, the numerical value of 12.5%, as well as bring forward the changes to the definition that we just spoke of in option 2. So the table in front of you illustrates what that 12.5% increase would look like. And as you can see here, again, you may be asking, why 12.5%? Well, if you can see on the screen here, it equates to a reasonable rounding out of values to be able to allow for someone with a lot under an acre to go up to 2,300 square feet of gross floor area, and then lots over an acre to go up to 3,330 square feet. But again, it is important to reiterate here that this option would also include the modifications to the gross floor area definition. So you're gaining flexibility from both sides through this option. So sorry, could we go to the next slide? Because I believe we have some more diagrams that might help further explain. Great, thank you, Denise. So again, from a visual perspective, this is what 12.5% of an increase would look like on a typical lot that's either 0.9 of an acre or 1.4 acres on the right side here. And then if we go back to that concept of thinking about how much increase that would give you from a 12 by 12 bedroom perspective, for a lot less than an acre, it would essentially allow you to go up by about 1.8 of a bedroom size. So just under 2 new bedrooms, I guess you could consider it that way. And then if your property is greater than an acre, you could actually go up to about 2.5 rooms based on a 12 by 12 room. So just wanted to include that, that visual representation of what this option appears to do. Denise, could we go back to the last slide? I just wanted to speak on the proposed housekeeping amendments. Thank you very much. So you may notice at the bottom of each of these slides that we've just been showing, there is this part 2, and this part 2 is essentially proposed housekeeping changes to 2 current official plan policies that were brought forward during this brainstorming session that we believe are reasonable housekeeping changes that can, that should proceed in addition to the proposed options in front of you this evening. So the first correction would be to section F5973A. So I'm not going to get too deep into the actual policies, but what is being proposed here is essentially modifying the existing 2.5-story language that exists in this policy in the 6 Mile Lake plan, and modify it to state 2 stories plus a roof in height. And the reason for this is essentially the language that currently exists in the general waterfront designation portion of the official plan states 2 stories plus a roof. So what this would really do is just make sure that the 6 Mile Lake language properly reflects the general waterfront. So there's not a mismatch of the approach when it comes to building height permitted in the official plan. So that's the first section that's proposed to be amended. And then the second proposed modification is to section F5974. And this would be to expand on the existing policy to state that proposed development, when it comes to any proposed variance that might occur, should be in accordance with, in addition to all other applicable policies of the plan, it should be in adherence with the 6 Mile Lake goals, basis and principles, as well as the environmental policies. So really what this modification is looking to achieve is expanding on the current language, which only states visual impact, and making sure that when anyone goes to potentially ask for further amendments to their as of right provisions for their property, that they're ensuring that their proposal is adhering to these additional statements that Harold went through in more detail earlier in this presentation, especially when it comes to the environmental goals and objectives for the 6 Mile Lake Community Plan. Next slide, please. Or probably 2 more slides. Yeah, the next slide, thanks. So those previous slides outlined the 3 options that we were presenting this evening for consideration by the community. Now, we would like to briefly run through a few other considerations that came out of our brainstorming session that was held in late 2021. So again, just to reiterate, these were not part of the original survey that was completed, as members of the board previously stated. And these are not part of any recommendations that are being made this evening for consideration by the community. Simply, these have been included as part of this discussion to make the most of this process, and also to gather more detailed feedback from the community to assist township staff and council in the future, especially when considering that a review of the township's official plan is forthcoming at some point in the near future. And this information from such a large group of the population of the township, I believe will be a great benefit to both staff and council to have. So this first item that you see on the screen here is in regards to site plan control. So currently, as many of you may know from potentially your own experiences in dealing with the planning department or redeveloping your property, you may know that in the past, and I believe is still current practice for township staff, if you proceed through a minor variance approval, for example, you typically are required to enter into a site plan control agreement with the township as a condition of your approval. So really through this process, the board is looking for any input and direction from the community on this matter. For example, would you agree that a site plan agreement should be required for all major development, even if you meet the zoning standards? The reason why this came up in our discussions really stems from the fact that there are a number of other municipalities, both in Muskoka and in Simcoe County, that have properties that are on the water, who are anticipating or who have already implemented this standard. So even if, let's say, you wanted to redevelop your property, you meet all zoning requirements, whether that be, setback from the water, your septic system meets zoning, all lot coverage provisions, gross floor area, you meet everything that's required, you would still be required to have a site plan agreement in place prior to obtaining a building permit. So again, this is being brought forward to gain some input from the community to see if this is potentially a topic that the community may want to bring forward for discussion to the township. Next slide, please. So another item that was discussed during our brainstorming sessions was the potential addition of language within the official plan to encourage that variances not be supported for proposals that would go beyond, for example, 10% over the value of what would be permitted. So you might ask, okay, what is this going to achieve? So essentially what this would achieve is it would encourage municipal staff to make sure that applications that request anything above what you would see here, for instance, a 10% above, would have to proceed by way of a zoning amendment. And that is something that would have to be considered by Township Council and not Committee of Adjustment. So it just provides better control as to who the approval authority would be for an application as such, and just in general to provide further encouragement for the future development of properties to maintain a less built form impact on the lake. So again, this information is being brought forward for consideration and for input from members of the community. And then next slide, please. So the third item that we spoke about is in regards to grandfathering, and more appropriately, the term is legal non-complying, but in this arena, we chose to maintain the term grandfathering because that is typically what the majority of people best understand legal non-complying to be, but technically both of them are quite interchangeable. But essentially the board is seeking your input through this process on if you would agree or disagree that if a property has the ability to relocate further from the water than it currently is, then should they be encouraged to do so by changes to potential language in official plan policy. So to provide some further context on this matter, again, surrounding municipalities are proceeding in modifying or beginning to consider modifying certain zoning permissions for legal non-complying dwellings or grandfathered dwellings. And I think it's just an important process, especially where the community is at right now, going through this large data seeking exercise that we're speaking about today, to be able to get some impact from this community to help, again, further direct township staff and council if this is an item that should be reviewed in further detail and considered for any future changes. So I believe now Denise will be opening to the more question and answer period. I was quite brief in my overview of those slides because I anticipate a number of people provided or reviewed the package that was sent out in advance of this meeting. We do have a slide here, as you can see, that has a summary of the three options that are proposed. So I believe we'll probably leave that up, Denise, on the screen, I'm assuming, and we'll take it from there.
Yes. So before we open it up to the general questions, we've received a number already. We did receive some through email in advance of the meeting. So we're going to start with those questions first. So the first question that came in from Mike Ferguson and Mike Goodwin was kind of a shared theme with the proposed GFA revisions. Will this trigger any revisions to the maximum lot coverage permitted in the zoning bylaw?
So, you know, obviously it's anticipated that if there were to be an increase into the maximum gross floor area, that township staff and council will likely need to consider as well an increase in the maximum lot coverage provision as well, to better reflect what the impact of the increase in GFA will be, especially for lots that are less than an acre on the lake. So I do anticipate that, but of course, a decision of that matter will be something that township staff will look at during their review. And also, I just wanted to take this moment to clarify, because I believe there was another question sent in, that the maximum lot coverage would apply to all structures on the property. So not just the dwelling, it would apply to if there was a garage, whether it be attached or detached, any sheds, any sleeping cabins, etc. So I also just wanted to clarify that through this question.
Great. So the second question received from Michelle, Joe, and Bob was a number of questions were received in regards to the current permissions that would apply to properties that have existing dwellings located within the required 20-meter front yard setback. Will any of the proposed options apply to or benefit owners who have dwellings that are legal non-complying?
I really appreciate the questions in regards to this topic, because I know it can be really confusing when we start talking about grandfathering and legal non-complying dwellings and questions of that nature. So just to start off, I'd like to just further describe my experience when I was at the township when it came to this matter. So if there is a dwelling that is located within the 20-meter setback, this dwelling is considered legal non-complying or a grandfathered dwelling. So depending on the distance of that dwelling from the water, this dwelling would be permitted as of right to have a minor expansion under section 411 of the zoning bylaw, which I believe a number of the questions that were received quoted sections of that part of the zoning bylaw. So what this would allow is you to increase by either 25%, 40%, or 70% based on the dwelling's existing footprint distance and depending on how far away you are from the water. So the proposed options that we're speaking about this evening, options 1 to 3, would apply to all properties. However, the dwellings that we're speaking of that are located within that 20-meter setback would still be restricted by section 411. So a very simple example of this would be if you have a 1,000 square foot dwelling that's located, let's say 8 meters from the water. So you're within 10 meters, so therefore the 25% increase would apply to you. You would be only permitted as of right under section 411 to add 250 square feet for a maximum of 1,250 square feet. So even though potentially through the options we're speaking of tonight, there would be an increase of, let's say, 500 square feet for someone who's 20 meters back. If you had a dwelling that was less than 20 meters from the water, you'd still be restricted by section 411. So those provisions would not change through the options proposed this evening. There is no impact to the existing as of right permissions for dwellings that are located within the 20-meter setback. So I hope that provides some further clarity around that concern. And also just as a whole, you know, the reason why this part of the discussion is coming up through this process really is, again, going back to that comment that there's a lot of other municipalities that are starting to readdress the way that they handle development that's very close to the water, primarily, especially in Simcoe County, and in those municipalities that have to also adhere to the growth plan and new policies that have come into play to further protect the shoreline. So through this process, the board is really just trying to seek a better understanding of the wants and needs of the lake when it comes to this matter. And, you know, this was determined to be a really good opportunity to get this feedback in regards to the grandfathering portion of this discussion. So To clarify, none of the options would remove those as of right permissions under section 411 of the bylaw. That's not part of the discussion this evening. More so, we are just looking for feedback of if that's something that you, as a property owner on 6 Mile Lake and taxpayer of the municipality, would potentially like to see staff or council consider in the future.
Okay, the next question we received was from Laura, and the question was, can you clarify what the rules are on yurts? A lot of yurts have been going up that are larger than 10 by 10, and they are temporary in nature.
And thank you to Laura for this question. And really this applies to a lot of, I know there's a lot of, when I was at the township, a lot of structures that wouldn't be a typical structure can be found in a lot of shoreline areas. So it is my understanding, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the township, but it is my understanding that a structure such as that would require a building permit, which would obviously need to meet the provisions of the zoning bylaw. But I would encourage you to reach out to the township's planning or building department to confirm that. As I can no longer speak on behalf of the township, that is my understanding. And I know that you'll be in great hands with the planning and building department to answer those questions.
Great. The next question was from Alan Brady. How are we able to opt out of any restrictions? For example, no basement restrictions.
It is my understanding. I am not part of the how the voting system is being handled, but it is my understanding from discussions with the board that the voting system itself will allow you to indicate any or all of the options that may not be acceptable to you if you wish. Additionally, there also, I believe, will be a comment section to provide further clarification, which we are greatly encouraging all of you to do. Provide as much detail as you are able and willing to do in regards to the proposed options.
Great. The next question was from Mike Goodwin. The question is about, in regards to attached garages, are these currently included in calculating gross floor area? Additionally, the proposed option 2 appears to remove attached garages from the GFA definition. If this is the case, how do you see that garages will still be regulated and not create a worse visual impact? For example, could a cottager now build a 5-car attached garage on their lot that would be visible from the lake?
So currently, attached garages have been considered part of total gross floor area of a dwelling when, for instance, a building permit is submitted for new development on lands on 6 Mile Lake. So the proposed options 2 and 3, because both of them deal with the proposed definition, they would essentially remove attached garages. You are correct in your question, Mike, that they would remove attached garages from the definition, which would, of course, allow residents to better utilize their gross floor area for more actual functional living spaces versus just a garage. The attached garages would still be regulated through lot coverage itself. And as I previously mentioned, lot coverage includes all built form structures on the subject property. So it would still be regulated through lot coverage. And also, it's not anticipated that by removing attached garages from gross floor area that it would create any further visual impact concerns, primarily due to the additional provision in the zoning bylaw that has a maximum dwelling width on lands on 6 Mile Lake. So essentially, if someone wanted to build a large garage that would be visible from the water, they would essentially be eating up almost their entire permitted dwelling width, and therefore wouldn't have much room left to play for their actual dwelling, which at least during my time at the township was very rarely, if ever, seen. So the lot coverage as well as the maximum dwelling width provisions really would be these 2 controls that the municipality would still have over attached garages. And of course, typically, again, we can never say across the board because a place like 6 Mile Lake, every lot is unique in its own way. But for the most part, most properties that are road access, typically, in my experience, would try and build their garages to the rear of their dwellings anyways, based on A, topography, and B, the fact that, of course, just their driveways are coming in from the rear of their property from their private roads. And, they want to maintain as much as their frontage for living space to be able to have views of the lake. So that hopefully sums up an answer in regards to the visual impact piece. And I do also recall there was a portion of some questions that asked if there was a loft or second story area above an attached garage, if that would be considered gross floor area. And it would be, and I don't anticipate that that would be changed or removed. But of course, that final interpretation would be something that township staff and their planning consultants would take a look at.
Great. The next question was also from Mike Goodwin and Dave Vincent. The proposed definition for walkout basement, is this just an observation / editorial comment, or is this the definition that's proposed? Also, why are basements still being discussed when 61% of the lake residents indicated that basements should be removed?
So the wording that was provided as part of the package that was released to the membership really was for more general purposes and is only suggestive at this point to just better help and assist the community while they review these proposed options. It is understood that any modifications to any definition in the zoning bylaw would need to be reviewed and considered by township staff, the planning consultants, as well as council themselves. And when it comes to the question as to, why are basements still being discussed, it's through the brainstorming sessions that we had, it was made clear that it's the opinion of the board that the survey response to that question was not as cut and dry as it potentially seemed to be, primarily based on comments that were received, in addition to just the typical, yes, no answer. And these comments really indicated to the board that there's many different varying opinions based on this basis, that simply that instead of just removing it altogether, there were a lot of different opinions. So really this exercise is just trying to further explore this item to provide better clarity, which will, hopefully again, assist township staff and council moving forward. We anticipate that the proposed option 2 and option 3 that includes discussion around the basement definition is going to spark more detailed responses and input from the community, which will be a great resource for everyone involved moving forward.
Great. The next question is from Glenna, and she asked, when is the township intending to pass a revised official plan and zoning bylaw? And what's going to happen to applications that are in the process, including pre-consultation, when this happens?
Speaking further to my previous comment, since I no longer work on behalf of the township, I'm unable to indicate when an official plan review or subsequent zoning review will commence, and how staff would handle active applications at that time. Based on the new department and planning consultant, I would encourage that this question be directed to the current township's director for potentially a more accurate timeline if they're able to provide at this point. But unfortunately, I don't have any insight into that, but I know that township staff and their planning consultant are doing a number of really important and big projects for the township. So it'll be interesting to see when they're able to undertake a review of this size. And I know that the board is really looking forward to being involved in that.
Right. The next question is also from Glenna. Is visual impact proposed to be removed from the official plan?
This is a great question. No, it's absolutely not intending to be removed. from the official plan policies. The proposed housekeeping amendment that I spoke about earlier essentially just intends to provide further clarity that any proposal that seeks to increase their permitted dwelling size or dwelling width has to do so and adhere to the overall principles of the 6 Mile Lake Plan. And those principles, as members of the board previously went through, include visual impact, but also include character, the environment, inclusive of water quality and natural heritage concerns, things like that. So it is absolutely not being proposed to be removed. Also, as part of this question, no additional criteria is proposed. Rather, it's really the intent of this housekeeping portion is to essentially just redirect the user or the reader of the plan back to those goals, bases, and principles, as well as the environmental policies, to ensure that they're aware that they exist and the extent of the importance to the community that those policies are adhered to.
Great. The next question is also from Glenna, and she'd like to know, how would a sunroom be handled in the proposed options?
Thanks for this. And Glenna, I know if you're listening, I know that your question was a lot more detailed than this, but I tried to scope it as best as I could. So I hope I address your question, but please let us know if I do not. So currently a sunroom or a screened porch would be included in gross floor area right now in the zoning bylaw. A sunroom is, again, when I was at the township and my interpretation of that during my time, a sunroom is a room that can be enclosed at times or sheltered on all walls from the elements. For instance, a screened porch, but a screened porch that would have glass that could come down and shut out, let's say, snow or rain at any time. Whereas a covered porch or a screened porch would not have the ability to be protected by the elements at any time. So just for some clarity between the two, because I know that sunroom and screened porch sometimes can be interchangeable, even though they do have two separate definitions in the zoning bylaw. Through the proposed options 2 and options 3, so those are the options that are proposing modifications to the definition. A covered porch or screened porch, again, the one that can't be protected by the elements, would be excluded from gross floor area. Whereas if the room has the ability to be sheltered from rain or snow, that would be included in gross floor area still. And again, just to clarify, option 1 would not propose any changes to the existing definition. Therefore, both a sunroom or a screened porch would still remain in the gross floor area calculation.
Great. The next question is a further add-on from Glenna. In regards to the other considerations, would this add more delay and cost to the permit process?
So in speaking of the other considerations that we briefly went through and that I'm sure a number of you read in more detail before tonight's meeting, if the township were to support any revisions to other requirements prior to building, such as a site plan control agreement to be in place for any new dwelling on the water, I would anticipate that this would add additional cost to an owner for the actual site plan agreement fee to the township. When it comes to timeline and delays, that would be a challenging thing to answer, as of course it would depend on the time of year, staff's capacity, and things of that nature. So I would anticipate that yes, both costs and delays would result, as it would with any changes to a development process. So hopefully that provides clarity in regards to that.
The next question from Glenna is also, would any of these proposals prohibit any minor variances to be applied for or granted?
So to clarify, none of the proposed options that we're speaking of this evening would prohibit the submission of any Planning Act application. The Planning Act permits property owners as of right to apply for approvals on their property, to ask for permissions outside of what is currently there. The township would not be able to stop submissions of that in that way. It would simply provide language that would discourage larger dwellings through those processes. So nothing that the board and then hopefully the community as a whole may propose to the municipality would ever stop the ability for someone to apply for any sought relief.
Great. The last question that she had was, is the concern more with old septic systems?
So the current zoning bylaw prohibits septic systems to be located, or sorry, prohibits new septic systems to be located less than 30 meters from the shoreline for properties on the water. So if a development proposal comes forward, which might require either an expansion to an existing septic system or an entirely new system, then that resident would have to comply with that 30-meter setback, or they would have to request a variance through that. So really, when we're speaking about the legal non-complying structures in this case, we are more identifying towards the built form of the dwellings versus septic systems. But just wanted to clarify that we are not proposing any modifications to that required 30-meter septic setback.
Great. And the last question we had was, why are grandfathering and hard ceiling caps on variances included in the recommendations to the township when they were not part of the survey?
To provide some clarity there again, which I believe I touched on earlier, those portions of tonight's discussion are not recommendations that are brought forward. Only options 1 to 3 are recommendations. Again, simply, this is just a time that the board is looking for additional feedback on these items that came through in our discussions in the brainstorming session. So really more of an information seeking process for those items to see if the community agrees or not, if those items should be explored more. So again, just going back to, we think this is a really great opportunity, having so much of the lake engaged and so much of the population of the township engaged to assist the township with some more information if possible.
Great. Those were all of the questions that we received as of 2 p.m. today. There were a couple questions that had come in after that point that were a bit lengthy in nature. We will review those and we will get back to you on that. Feel free also, if you'd like to ask any of them live, for those individuals that did submit them after 2 p.m. today, let me know and we can unmute you and you can ask your question live. We just didn't get a chance to do that during the workday. Before we move into the questions that we have received so far live, Victoria, do you need a bio break or are you good to continue?
I think I'm good to continue, but I really appreciate you asking. But I'll let you know, or if anyone else needs one, just jump in.
Great. So the first question we'll get into is from Marion Wilson. She stated, reference is made to attached garages. What about a detached garage?
That's a great question. So a detached garage currently in the zoning bylaw would not apply to a gross floor area calculation. That would only be regulated by, from a size perspective, from a footprint perspective, by setbacks and by lot coverage. So detached garages would not be considered part of the GFA discussion.
Hopefully that addressed Marion's question. Steve's internet is currently crashed, so he's having a bit of a challenge getting into the meeting. So we'll just move on to the next questions. If any of the people who submitted them would like further clarification, feel free to use the Q&A box while we work on Steve's internet issues. So the next question that we had was a housekeeping provision. This is from Bob Boyd. What does it mean in accordance with principles, goals, etc.? Based on what Harold read to us earlier, putting in a dock wouldn't be aligned with the goals. Won't this be problematic and subjective for the township to assess?
Thank you for your question. And again, I'm going to do my best to answer these questions on the fly. But if I hope that members of the community will seek further clarification if I'm not able to address them exactly as asked. So I appreciate everybody's patience. The proposal for the housekeeping that we're seeking would only apply to applications that have to do with a dwelling itself. So any variances that might, because of course, I'm sure a number of members of the community are aware that often dock applications have to go forward for a variance for a reason or another. This proposed housekeeping would only apply to applications that seek to vary the established maximum size or width of a dwelling. So it's my opinion that it would not apply to any dock application.
Great. It looks like we have Steve back now. So our next question is from Bruce Hanson. The proposed GFA term such as is ambiguous. This leaves the door open to anything someone argues is similar to or should be in the list of exceptions. This is exactly the type of issue that has gotten the township into problems before. Why not just list the specific exceptions, thereby making it very clear what is excluded?
Thank you for that, Bruce. I'm definitely going to have to read further into your question to make sure I address everything, maybe as a follow-up to tonight's discussion. But I believe what you were seeking clarification on, essentially, instead of putting a cap on a number or sorry, I'm going to step back there for a second. Instead of saying that a variance needs to comply with the goals, bases, and principles, et cetera, that there should be strict criteria. I believe that's what you're referring to.
No, actually.
Hi, Bruce.
Yeah, she unmuted me, so.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Bruce.
Hi. Thank you, everyone. This is a fantastic review and very detailed. And Victoria, I love the pictures and the comparison to room size and gross floor area. I've never seen that before, and it really helps visualize. In terms of my question, no, I was there. It says such as screen porches, and I can't remember what the other one was. But the such as leaves it open to screen porches, and we don't know what else. And that what else is what's been challenged in the past and used for an example, which I didn't put in, but was in my notes. If you look later, what I sent in happened with screen porches, where they were called verandas, and they doubled the size of the bunkies because we didn't have a definition for veranda. And thus the reason there is a 4-foot overhang limit today, which I don't have a problem getting rid of. But saying such as then leaves the interpretation open to any lawyer or planner out there to decide what they want to include and fight for. Whereas if we there's 2 things listed, let's keep it at those 2 things, or additional ones if there's valid ones that we would consider. And get rid of the such as words and just say the following.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate that clarification, Bruce, or I would have totally went on a tangent that was unrelated to your question. So thank you for that. Through our brainstorming session and what we're discussing tonight, it was my intent to, and I can see where you see that such as language, without bringing the township staff and their planning consultant into discussions yet. I wanted to not be too exact and firm in my suggestion for the options. Also because through this process, I'm hoping to get some more clarification from members of the community as to what they would like to see included or excluded. But I do anticipate, Bruce, that through this process, that GFA definition, and I believe that township staff would only support a GFA definition change that would be black and white in that instance. So I do anticipate it being that, if that is the direction that the community wishes to go. But it just didn't seem, again, for the extent of what I was retained for, to get to the point of proposing specific definitions at this point. We're not there yet, but I agree with you. I think language in a definition of that important nature needs to be whittled down to exact standards. So I anticipate that would happen.
The next question is from Andrews Kung. Is storage area above a detached garage GFA?
Thank you for your question. So if an attached garage, and again, I'm only can speak to my time at the township, and if you have a specific question about your property or any proposals that you might have, I would strongly encourage you to talk to current township staff. But during my time at the township, if I were to have gotten a building permit application for a attached garage that had storage area in an upper loft, let's say, and if it was labeled as storage area, any part of that area that was greater than 1.8 meters in height or 5'9", if you're more of a foot person than a meters person like I am, anything greater than having a 5'9" floor to ceiling clearance would be included in gross floor area, even if it is just labeled as storage, based on the current rules. So I hope that answers their question.
So the question was around a detached garage. Sorry if I misspoke.
I apologize. So no, thank you for that. Thank you for that. But now everybody knows my answer to an attached garage. So for a detached garage, if there were to be an area above proposed for storage, that would not be part of gross floor area because it is not part of the dwelling itself. There are other regulations, there are other provisions in the zoning bylaw that would stipulate how large or tall a detached garage could be, but it would not be included in that calculation.
Okay, so we're going to move to the next question from Mike Saleh. He says he's new to the lake and he'd like to know if the original GFA of 2,045 square feet issued by Georgian Bay or Muskoka. So is the original GFA issued by Georgian Bay / Muskoka?
And sorry, did they quote the 275 GFA restriction, Denise? I can't see the
2,045 square feet.
Oh,
So is the
sorry,
original
square feet. Sorry, yes, the square feet. Right. So it's my understanding through my time at the township that value came into play through the township's official plan review process in collaboration with the 6 Mile Lake community. So it was not from the district of Muskoka, which I assume is who they were referring to when they mentioned Muskoka. It was at the township level.
So then the next question is from Paul. There's no last name, so hopefully there's only one Paul tonight. But the question is, if there's not one wall entirely above grade, but 80% of a wall is above grade, will the entire basement be excluded from GFA? And what happens if there's 100% above grade walkout basement, but only 40% of the area is habitable? Will 75% count as GFA? And let me know if you'd like me to repeat those, because that's a pretty lengthy question.
Yeah, can you repeat the first part? I think I understood the second part of if it's entirely above grade, but that first section, could you repeat that?
Yeah, if there's not one wall entirely above grade, but 80% of a wall is above grade, will the entire basement be excluded from GFA?
So thank you for your question, Paul. It's hard for me to answer those types of specific questions without kind of sketching it out and being able to really sit down with it. But the intent of what's being proposed in option 2 and option 3 for the changes to the definition would seek to only include 75% of a basement that would have direct access towards the water side of a dwelling. The zoning bylaw currently has different definitions that adhere to or that apply to basements, such as there's a cellar definition, there's a basement definition. I can't say for sure in your example how it would be applied yet until a specific definition would be ironed out and proposed. But please, we have a record of your question, and I will do my best post this meeting to actually sit down and take a look and see if I can provide you a better answer. I apologize that I'm not able to really answer that on the fly, but I will look into that and get you an answer. And just to everyone listening in this evening, I'm going to do my absolute best to get you answers as soon as possible, because I know answers to these questions are really going to impact how you answer this survey. So please know that that is of utmost importance. So thank you, Paul, for your patience, but I will get back to you on that one.
Great. And then the next piece of that question was, what happens if there's 100% above grade walkout basement, but only 40% of the area is habitable? I can't speak English. Will 75% count as GFA?
So the way that we have structured the option at this time would count 75% of that situation. However, it is anticipated that, again, not all these areas would be considered living space, but the proposal in front of the committee this evening to consider would, in that circumstance, apply 75% of the total area, even if only 40% would actually be of living space. So please provide your feedback on that. But that is how it is proposed at this time.
The next question we have is from Kimberly Swinoga. If visual impact is considered an extremely important aspect of our official plan and includes consideration for cottage size, setback, and landscaping, should the chosen color of the dwelling not also be included in the list of these restrictions? I would argue the use of bright colors like white siding or trim, or something like a bright red roof on a 1,500 square foot cottage located close to the water has a relatively higher visual impact than a dark brown cottage that is 3,000 square foot at 20 meters from the water.
Thank you for that question, Kimberly, and I hope you're doing well. It's nice to hear familiar names from my time back at the township, so I appreciate you coming this evening and asking some questions. I think you bring up a great point that's a bit outside of the scope of what we're talking about this evening, but what you're speaking to when it comes to building materials, building colors, things like that, would be beyond the scope of what I would consider, in my opinion, reasonable policies to put into an official plan. There are other municipalities that use a tool called a development permit process to capture more detailed restrictions when it comes to visual impact in their shoreline areas. So through that process, they're able to have requirements of that nature that you spoke of. So in this specific instance, just looking at the official plan, I understand where you're coming from, but I think that would end up becoming an entirely different mechanism that it's not my understanding at this time that the township is considering that or would consider that. But that feedback is really important to take into consideration. And I hope that you can provide that in the written survey response.
The next question we have is from Karen. Visual impact or size. I see these as different. Victoria, can you please elaborate? And just to remind the people who have submitted questions, as we read out your question, you do have the permission to unmute yourself if you'd like to redirect or ask a follow-up to the answer that Victoria has given.
As a follow-up to that, in this case, we have two Karens. And I unmuted one and the other I'm unable to mute as the tool is saying their Zoom instance is not new enough to allow it.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
So
I'll try
I'm
and
not
answer.
sure if I have the right Karen.
Okay. Maybe not, but I'll try and answer in the meantime, and maybe the other Karen can type out in the meantime, I guess. Denise, could you repeat that question for me? Sorry. Thank you.
Yes, the question was visual impact or size. I see these as different. Can you please elaborate?
Thank you for your question. Definitely when it comes to a size of a dwelling and visual impact, things can be, the way that a structure could be, the way that a dwelling could be constructed could mitigate its visual impact regardless of its size, whether that being it being set better within the current topography of a property. So the actual, overall height of a building could be reduced by it being built in more conformity with the topography of the landscape, or other things such as mitigation measures when it comes to additional plantings, things like that. So I would agree with that statement that visual impact and the size of a dwelling are not the exact same thing. I think the size of a dwelling can be mitigated through different means to mitigate its overall visual impact. So hopefully that provides some clarification, but if she has any follow-up, I'd be happy to hear if we can figure out the Karen situation.
We did confirm it was Karen Petrie, but she's unable to speak. Her mic isn't working.
If Karen, if you can still hear me, and if you have any follow-up to that, please submit via, I think you might even have Denise's email, and we can take a look at that afterwards for sure.
Right. Our next question is from Michael DeJong, who says, Victoria, I'm a residential designer in the province of Ontario and wonder why the GFA calculation formula is not consistent with other municipalities. For most, the plywood area of a home, all floors, constitutes the GFA. However, in Georgian Bay, the calculation includes all covered porches, either screened or not. Why the difference? To be restrictive, you just need to change the percent ratio to the lot area. Is the concern further constraints on width or mass of the cottage?
Thank you for your question, Michael. And I agree with your statement, absolutely, that the term gross floor area is definitely different in other municipalities and regions. When it comes to the reason why gross floor area is defined the way that it is, that discussion would have to go back to the 2014 revisions to the zoning bylaw, and when that new definition came into play for the township. And unfortunately, I can't really, I wasn't part of that process at the time. I have some general knowledge of why things occurred and what happened, but I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speak on behalf of the township in that instance. But I think that's a really great question to ask current township staff if they can look into, previous records of the last review process for the zoning bylaw and why exactly those changes came into force.
Thank you. It was just nice. It's kind of nice to see it consistent so that you calculate it the same way all the time.
I absolutely, I understand. And I used to hear from that. I used to hear that feedback a lot when I was at the township, dealing with designers and architects about building permits. So I can understand the frustration as a designer for sure.
Thank you.
The next question comes from John Latimer. Can you comment on the variances that have been approved by the COA since the last zoning bylaw as compared to option number 1? In other words, would they comply with option number 1 or would they still have needed a variance application?
So you're aware I'm not able to unmute John due to his version of Zoom.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Well, I'll do my best to answer your question, John. And again, if you can provide any follow-up in writing, that would be great. As I previously mentioned, I didn't speak on it very long, but the option 1 that has been discussed tonight of that 25%, the intent of that is to try and capture the overall average. And when I say overall average of minor variances since 2014, of course, there's always going to be outliers higher than or less than the average, but really looking at the majority of applicants. And as I know, and I'm sure there's a number of you in the audience today that I even assisted through the process during my time at the township, that they can probably attest to this, that the majority of the applications that I saw during my time would have likely been able to avoid the variance process if option 1, if that 25% increase was in place at that time, they would have been able to, just obtain a building permit. So the intent through option 1, you are correct, is to try and mitigate the overall request for variances and the burden that does put on the municipality and the taxpayers as a whole. But of course, it is important to obviously note that I don't think it will ever be possible for myself or any other planner or township staff and council to ever mitigate any application moving forward. There's always going to be special circumstances, especially when it comes to properties in areas such as 6 Mile Lake that have such unique property boundaries and features. So the 25%, in my opinion, I believe would mitigate a significant number of variances that have been requested in the past during my time at the township. That's the only time that I think it's appropriate for me to speak on. But I really appreciate that question, John. And if you have any follow-up, please let me know through writing.
Great. The next question is from Seamus Tynan, who says several of the properties, old and new, around our lake have wraparound decks. Please confirm that these decks are excluded from the proposed GFA.
Seamus, thanks for your question. So when it comes to deck requirements, and I'm going to assume that your question is only speaking to uncovered decks. So if there's a cottage that has an uncovered deck, that deck, as of right in the zoning bylaw, can protrude 4 meters into the 20-meter front yard setback. So essentially, it would require a 16-meter setback to a deck. That area would not be included in a gross floor area calculation. That would only be regulated by that setback that I was speaking of, and also side yard setbacks as well. A deck, a wraparound deck would also have to be 5 meters away from any other structure, as well as side lot lines. So hopefully that provides you clarification, James.
The next comes from Jim. Why should we be concerned about the ceiling height of an attic or basement if the building meets the height, width, and lot coverage restrictions. The building would look the same from the lake or the road, even if you don't include these areas in GFA.
Thank you, Jim, for your question. I can understand your comment about that. Essentially what I think that the gist of your question is, why do we care what people are doing in their attic, for instance, if the overall height of the dwelling meets the zoning bylaw? Really, we're speaking about it this evening because that delineation of that area currently exists in the gross floor area definition. It is stated in there both for areas in a attic or second story area, as well as areas in a basement. They are delineated in the definition with specific values to that. So that's why we are speaking about it. But appreciate your input on that. And please, again, when you have the opportunity in the survey to further clarify your opinion on that and why maybe it should or should not be included. So thank you.
The next question is from Hubert Hicks. If the GFA is increased, are variance applications for higher GFAs no longer accepted or allowed? And I'll
So,
pause there. There's a question.
okay. So sorry, Denise, just to clarify, he's asking if the GFA were to increase, would that no longer allow variances for greater than that to be permitted, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So no, that the proposals would not result in that. Essentially what would happen, or what the intent behind what we're speaking about this evening is, by increasing the amount allowed by GFA, again, going back to hopefully we would capture the majority of people's needs for their future built form on their property. But for those that it maybe, for instance, cannot, they absolutely would still be able to submit for a variance for greater built form. However, that proposal would just have to be further aligned with the official plan policies, primarily focused on the environment and to ensure that the proposed development, if it's greater than what is permitted, just is in keeping with the 6 Mile Lake Community Plan, beyond just visual impact, inclusive of character, inclusive of those environmental policies that we spoke about, lake health, water quality, things like that. So nothing that we're speaking about this evening would ever stop a member of the public to submit an application for anything beyond the scope of what we're speaking of. We're just hoping that proposals moving forward can just have better accommodation for what the 6 Mile Lake goal and objective is from the community plan.
So the next part of his question was, should there be some restriction on how large a GFA can be built relative to the adjoining properties? As an example, on Long Lake, we had a very large, illegal at the time, cottage built that absolutely dwarfed the cottage next door, diminishing its value to land value at best. Message is, be cognizant and considerate where you buy. Besides, it's very unsightly to see a huge cottage built among much smaller ones.
I think that's a great comment. And to be very frank, that wasn't considered during our brainstorming session, nor have I considered something like that to be proposed, but I really appreciate that feedback, and please submit in writing so that it can be part of the survey information going forward.
The next question comes from Andy. just some clarification, please. Am I understanding correctly that if your cottage is less than the 20-meter setback, none of the proposed GFA increase would apply?
So that's a very hard question to answer for everybody. It would likely, it would probably apply to people who are very close to the 20-meter setback. Because again, touching back on section 411 and the restrictions that apply to dwellings within the 20-meter setback, again, just off the top of my head, without being able to actually calculate something out in real time, I think the proposed gross floor area increases we're speaking of this evening would potentially only probably have some impact to those legal non-complying dwellings that are very close to the 20-meter setback. But if you can give an example, Andy, in writing, I can provide further clarification on that after the meeting. In your specific instance, if you believe it would be helpful for you to answer the survey appropriately, I'd be happy to do that.
I'm not sure if I'm unmuted or not, but
Andy, yep.
oh, okay, great. Thank you, Victoria. I think it's the meeting's going really well, Denise and Victoria. Thank you so much. It's you're very informative, Victoria, and answering a lot of good questions. And I know you're doing the best that you can with all these last minute ones. But yeah, my cottage specifically is, I'll say, and I'm going to use feet. I'll say that I'm about 20 to 25 feet from the water's edge. So when we hear 20 meters, that's like 65 feet. I'm not sure I know too many cottages that are that far from the water's edge. So just for clarification, that's why we, my wife and I were talking here, I wonder what it means. So
thank you for providing that clarification. And I know in the beginning we spoke that we weren't going to answer site specific questions, but I believe no, that's okay. I think, and I'm sure the board members would be okay with me just proceeding in this general context, because I think it might help answer other people's questions that might be similar. So Andy, your property being approximately 7.5 meters from the water, you would be under section 411 as it's currently written, you would be restricted to 25% of an increase based on your current gross floor area. So I'm not sure the total size of your dwelling, but let's say if it's 1,000 square feet, you would only be allowed to increase by that 25%. So the gross floor area permissions that we're speaking about this evening, you would only be able to benefit from that if you were to rebuild 20 meters back.
I see.
Provide clarification.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The next question we have is from Kathy and Bill, who ask, shouldn't a reasonable definition of a walkout basement include those with walkout areas that exceed 5 meters in width rather than the whole lakefront wall?
Sorry, I'm just trying to write down the include those that exceed 5 meters in width versus the entire front wall. Sorry, Denise, could you repeat that?
Shouldn't a reasonable definition of a walkout basement include those with walkout areas that exceed 5 meters in width rather than the whole lakefront wall?
Oh, I see. My answer to that is probably going to have to, the reason why the proposed, or at least the definition provided as part of this process to, again, just get this discussion going, wasn't that specific, really is because I think the board, and as well when I came on, the scope of my assistance to the board through this process really just included trying to direct the conversation as to where we're going to go. And I think getting more specific as to what and how a definition should be addressed in this case, I think will be better achieved and reviewed at the township level with township staff and their qualified staff that are there currently, as well as their planning consultant and their building department. I think details of that level will be dealt with through the review process with the township. So Kathy and Bill, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I can envision your intent behind your question, and I please provide that detailed option in your response, because I think it will further help guide township staff when they're taking a look at, okay, if it is to be proposed to be amended or added as a definition, how detailed should it go? So I think that's really important information from both of you who have a lot of experience in planning, as I know. So thank you for that.
Our next question comes from Glenna McClelland. She says, this question reflects my question 3 about the subjectivity of visual impact. Shouldn't there be more clear criteria to use in determining this?
Thanks for your question. I think that if it ends up being the overall goal of the majority of the community to see more of detailed criteria when it comes to visual impact, I think that is something that the township staff could definitely successfully achieve in coordination with the 6 Mile Lake community. And I think that's an important point to make in your response to the survey. I think given my scope of my assistance through this process at this time, I don't think it's, I'm not really able to comment further, but I do anticipate that will be a really fruitful part of the discussions moving forward for the community to have with the township.
The next question comes from Barbara Boyd. Victoria, in your professional opinion, would an option 4 that included option 1 and option 2 be possible? For example, 25% and modifications.
Thank you, Barbara, for your question. I think that there could be an opportunity for option 1 and option 2 if it were to determine to be the majority of the community's vision to see it, to see the flexibility move in that direction. You know, as someone who does not, and I do want to make this quite clear, you know, my professional opinion throughout my time at the township, as well as right now in my role in assisting the board through this process, really is based on my experience at the township, as well as the existing official plan policies and the provincial policies. I do not own property on 6 Mile Lake. I do not have history in the area. And so a huge part of my professional opinion, and I think a lot of, you know, everyone who works at the township in the planning department really does rely on associations such as 6 Mile Lake Community Association and the Ratepayers Association to be able to better understand what truly is the community's values and wants and needs for the future. You know, what do you want your community to look like in 50 years? And from that information that we can get through this process that we're having, that we're going through this evening, will better allow professional planners such as myself and members at the in township staff to be able to make the best decisions possible to make sure that any proposal does reflect what the community wants. So I think if, depending on the results of this survey and the overall direction that the community would like to see, I think an iteration of this being option 1 and option 2, or a completely different method of trying to achieve a middle ground is possible, absolutely. And that's why I really want to stress to everyone this evening and anyone watching afterwards that your detailed input and your personal experience is really going to be valuable information for everyone to use. So I appreciate your question. I think there's opportunity for modifications in the future, but it's hard for me to really state my professional opinion on that until I see really what the community results are. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to stick my opinion into a situation when I'm not an existing community member of that. As you know, I have to stick my professional opinion to the current official plan policies.
Thanks, Victoria. I don't think everybody wants a large cottage or a super large cottage. I'm trying to, what would be the best way that we have less asks for variances? And so that's more what I was getting at. And Denise, I don't know if you can answer this, but if we wanted to put it in different option when the voting comes along, how will that work that the board's going to know what people wanted?
Yes, so you're going to have the option of saying the option that's presented is acceptable to you or it's not acceptable. If it isn't acceptable as it is, but you have comments that would make it, if we did this or that, you can add all of those comments to each of the options so that we understand better what people are thinking and where their heads are at. So you'll have an opportunity to provide comments on every option and indicate whether or not you're good with it as is or not.
Barb, if I could just jump in for a second. When we came up with that 25%, it was based on the average. Like we took some data on all of the variances that occurred over about a 7-8 year period. And we averaged them out and it came to 22.5%. So that's where we got the 25%, with the hope that that would reduce the number of variances. And then so with the second and third option, one was either change the definition, which would add space, usable space, or let's do a hybrid and cut that 25% in half, because then you're getting the benefit of more space plus 12.5%. So it was really, it was motivated by reducing variances.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Our next question comes from Tony Schmidt. Currently, the township is over budget by over 200,000, fighting appeals. At what point does the Cottage Association and the township realize people's property rights do not want to be controlled under a special plan for just our lake? How many appeals have the township been able to defend?
Tony, thank you for your comment. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the township in this manner about how many appeals has the township been able to handle on behalf of 6 Mile. If you're looking for detailed information on that, I would encourage you to speak to township staff directly, and they can give you more accurate information that's more up to date. And your comment about the association as a whole, I believe, is probably noted by the board who are taking notes of the comments this evening. Thank you.
I guess I'm currently unmuted, am I?
We can hear you. Thanks, Tony. Yep.
Thank you so much. And I wonder if I could maybe direct that question to Paul. I know that he's quite involved at the township, and maybe he would know that answer.
Our township councillors are just on here as an observation to listen into the community and hear what's going on, but none of them are actually participating in this meeting. It's just more of a listening exercise for them. We will share all of this feedback back with them, though. So thank you for sharing your feedback.
Okay, so the only other question then I would have is I have personal knowledge of a couple of cottage owners on the lake that have gone through the process, having to hire lawyers, had approvals from township staff, declined by council, go through the LPAT process, incur thousands, and I'm talking $70,000 to $100,000 in expenses, to then finally be approved by LPAT, and they can move forward with what they certainly would have been entitled to through the normal planning process if this special plan wasn't implemented. And please note, I have a 600 square foot cottage on the lake. So I'm not fighting for anything myself, but I don't want my rights encumbered by a special lake policy.
Thanks, Tony, for clarification on your comment. I think my best response to that, and maybe a member of the board could jump in if they like, but I think it sounds like your opinion is definitely that you would prefer to see there be a complete scrap of the community plan as it currently has existed due to your concerns over costs and things like LPAC costs and whatnot that the township and members of the public have incurred in the past. I think probably the best way to put forward your concerns is through that a survey, and there will be an opportunity for you to, as was previously mentioned, that if you don't believe any of these changes should be requested and a new change should be that it be removed in its entirety, and that's your opinion, I think that would be the best manner to provide that feedback. But Harold, maybe you can jump in if I'm speaking correctly on the board's behalf.
Yeah.
Thank you, Victoria.
Again, as Victoria said before, we're not changing the laws. It's up to the township to change the laws. We're giving them feedback from the lake, and it's really up to the township to do either change things or do nothing, depending on what they decide to do. We, all we can do is just provide a direction. Some of the changes we're requesting would hopefully provide more clarity so that people don't, so that there would be less LPAT appeals. But generally, it's not up to us to change the laws. It's up to the township. If you really feel that way, you got to talk to them and not us. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you for that clarification, Harold. I guess originally we didn't have our own special plan for the lake, and somehow that got brought forth the township, so these changes were implemented. So I guess we'll see how the survey goes. We do appreciate all the efforts. It's not falling on deaf ears, and I don't, my comments are not meant to be disrespectful. I just certainly hope that the people's property rights on the lake can be the same as any other lake within the municipality.
Thanks, Tony. We really appreciate you
Thank you.
attending and giving that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Our next question comes from Dave Jordan. So there's a two-part question here. So I'll ask the first part and then follow up with the second. The first question is for clarity. Please confirm that under option number 1, current basement inclusion and roof overhang still included as in the current bylaw.
Dave, yes, you are correct that option 1 would only increase the numerical value of gross floor area. It would not remove those specified areas from the definition, so they would still be included. Yes.
And the second part of that question was, how can one consider option number 2 unless the modified basement areas included is not specifically defined? In other words, modify to what?
Thank you for that feedback. I can understand that the modified gross floor area definition, and I believe there was a proposed definition provided in the package circulated for consideration. It's hard for me to really comment further on that. I think that as Harold was mentioning, through this entire process, essentially what would occur is the community or the majority of the community, hopefully, if that's possible to get to that point, will provide suggestions to the municipality to consider through their review. And I anticipate that through the township's review, modifications and considerations to things such as the definition would change slightly and potentially may not be what has been written so far. So really what we're looking for is feedback on overall, would you as a member of the community like to see that definition be modified? And if you have specific feedback as to how you think that definition should be modified, please provide it in your survey response, because it'll be really helpful guiding the conversation forward to the township's professionals if they decide to review that. So I apologize that I can't really answer further about that, but please, provide.
If I may, Victoria, you don't ever need to apologize. I think you're doing a fabulous job under the circumstances. Harold and the board, I think you guys have done a great job, and you can always be critical. I'm just looking at the summary page, and I'm quite cognizant of the answers to my questions, but I'm putting my feet in the shoes of those that would read it and would not necessarily understand it. That said, I think that, and I would hope, because I have not seen the questions or the survey yet, which will come after the meeting, I would hope that there would be more clarity attached to each option so that people can make an informed decision. That's kind of what the whole problem is at times when we go through these exercises. Sometimes things come out more confusing at the end than they were at the beginning. And I guess that's not unusual when you're dealing with something like this. But I guess if I was being critical, the only thing I would say is simple works best and allows people to decide. It may not be possible, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I would hope that when you ask people to choose from options, that they understand the nature of the option and what's included in the option. So I know you can only put so much on a page, and there's probably answers in the body of the material that you've sent, but I'm sure a lot of people won't read that to the intensity of some and yourselves, and then thereby may not be able to answer these questions appropriately. So I think directionally, everything is great. It's going in the right direction. The basement issue is the largest one, in my view, my personal view, and I have no agenda. I'm not going to rebuild. I have no applications, but based on what I've seen, that is the number one problem that goes. If I had to make a suggestion, option one would work if you eliminated basements, but then there's probably other issues with that. So, and everybody has an opinion and they're entitled to it. So, but that's mine. And thank you very much. I'll shut up now because I'll just go on and on. So thank you, Victoria, for your answer, and I'll unmute or whatever I have to do here. Thank you.
I'd just like to jump in and just remind everyone that if you don't understand the question or you still need further clarification, we've given you 2 weeks to answer the survey. So that's plenty of time for you to send us an email, and either Victoria or one of us might be able to add some clarification in order that you can make an informed decision on the survey. And there, if all else fails, you can always indicate that we've left space for you to indicate that you don't, you just do not understand this, and therefore that's the way you're going to answer.
So our next question comes from Doug Fennell, who asks, do any of the proposed changes bring 6 Mile in line with the rest of the township rules?
That is definitely a bit of a loaded question. And I say that just because this township is extremely unique. with its many different community plans that are embedded in both the official plan and the zoning bylaw. But for the purposes of answering this question, I'm going to stick with the general waterfront designation and the general shoreline residential zoning. So typically, and again, I'm answering this question very generally, but the lands that this designation and zoning would apply to would be lands such as properties along Gloucester Pool, as well as properties on Go Home Lake. So just as an example, the proposals, I think, if regardless, the general waterfront designation and zoning does not have a gross floor area limit for properties that can meet a 20-meter setback. If you are on Gloucester Pool, for instance, and your dwelling is 10 meters from the water, you still have to adhere to that section 411 that we spoke about earlier. So legal non-complying structures still have a gross floor area requirement in those cases. But Doug, I'm sure your question is more about, if you were to build a new build on Gloucester Pool versus 6 Mile Lake, would these rules bring you further or closer to that? Yes and no. I think we would be, or the association, or sorry, the community would be further in allowing for more flexibility for proposed built form and allowing for people to have better decisions on how they want their structures to operate internally through this process. But with maintaining a gross floor area requirement, I wouldn't say that it would be comparable to somewhere like Gloucester Pool or Go Home Lake, who don't have that requirement. So it's probably not the answer exactly what you were looking for, but if you're able to give any follow-up comment or send in a comment, please do, to make sure I'm assisting.
Okay, our next question comes from Heather. And she says, I rather like the idea that 6 Mile was one of the first to create a plan to guide development on 6 Mile to retain the natural environment. I assume this means different rules for property owners on 6 Mile compared to elsewhere. I've always wondered how we ensure no one purchases a property here without being informed about the limitations and what they can do with their property.
Thank you, Heather, for that comment. I can only speak to my time at the township, and I will admit that there were instances where we had to be the unfortunate informants to new purchasers of land on 6 Mile Lake who were not aware of the community plan and its restrictions when they purchased property. I know that the township now, especially, and has made it very clear to, for instance, other sectors in the development industry, such as contractors and real estate agents, people of that nature, making it very clear that, for instance, a lot of real estate agents will contact the township and ask for input on a property. And I know that township staff now, still currently, and as well during my time, did our absolute best to provide as much information as possible about the 6 Mile Lake rules and provisions and regulations that would apply for any potential new buyer. But sometimes it's unfortunate that it can be missed. I think everyone here this evening has probably heard of someone throughout their life who purchased a property and was unaware of certain things, and it's really unfortunate. And if you have any suggestions to the township of maybe how better or even to the board, how better the board and the community, or sorry, the board and the township can further try and make sure that that doesn't happen to future purchasers of land on 6 Mile Lake, I think they would be absolutely open to any suggestions. It's an unfortunate circumstance that sometimes happens. But yeah, any input on that I'm sure would be really appreciative by both the board and the township.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see it be insisted upon with the real estate agents. Then we have private sellers naturally who have to be dealt with. So I don't know what the levers are in governance that can affect what is required of a seller or a real estate agent in these situations. But to me, that's where to go. And I understand the issue of it's my property. I should be able to do what I want with it. And I would agree, once you've bought it, everybody feels that way. But at the same time, there are always obligations in a community and various settings that have to be met, you know, in order to be, we don't have a completely free hand anywhere when we're part of a community, and trying to work together with nature these days is as we see, a further obligation we've neglected, and we have to get on it. So I'm very grateful to be part of the 6 Mile Lake community that's worked so hard on this issue. But to me, I've been targeting, how do we make sure nobody buys without that knowledge? So I'd love to build that in somehow.
Thanks, Heather.
The next question that we have, there's 2 parts to it. It comes from Bruce. The first part is in the proposed definition of a walkout basement, which is page 18 of the town hall package we sent out. He says, and a basement definitions differ by a very small difference to average grade being above or below the 50% mark. Basement means a basement or a cellar that of a dwelling that features at least one entirely above grade. And do we need to keep some form of ceiling limit, even 8 feet, for significantly slanted floors, so as not to penalize cottage owners who may have a half floor walkout due to low ceilings, effectively the reverse of what's there today, i.e. areas less than XXX will not be included. What if more than one wall is above grade and the door is placed on the side wall and not facing the lake? Why does it suddenly not become a walkout basement?
Thank you, Bruce. That was extremely detailed, and I will definitely take a look after the fact. And even if you are here and wanted to jump on too, feel free. But I do understand your concern. I think that's a really great suggestion about taking a look at that 1.8 meters, for instance, in floor to ceiling height, and maybe could that be modified, or you know, is there something that can be done with that to allow people for more flexibility, especially a lot of properties on the lake deal with topography issues, which can essentially create useless areas in lower basements. But your question about the walls and things like that, I'll have to look into further detail and get back to you. I don't think I'm able to, especially at almost 9 o'clock at night, be able to comprehend that visually at this point on the fly, but I'll look into that for you and see if I can.
Fine. That's fine.
Thanks, Bruce.
Take care.
So the next series of questions come from Paul. I'll ask each separately. The first is, can you clarify where detached garages and bunkies fit into total lot coverage? Is that 8% or 10%?
So when it comes to detached structures, they would be part of the total lot coverage, which for 6 Mile Lake right now is delineated between you're allowed 8% of total lot coverage within the area of 60 meters from your current water setback. So essentially 60 meters from the water, you're allowed a lot coverage of 8% within that area. And then you're also allowed a maximum lot coverage for the entire property as well as 8%. So for a detached garage or sleeping cabin, things of that nature, they would fall within the maximum 8% that you would be permitted.
Great. The next part of his question was, why did you not provide an option that meets all of the results from the landowner survey?
Thanks, Paul, for that question. It's a bit challenging to answer that on the fly. I think the scope of my involvement through this process was to really just engage in the brainstorming sessions with the board, which was a great opportunity, and be here this evening and do my best to insert my experience where I could. I don't know if there is, it's going to be challenging for me as someone who does not work at the township anymore to be able to put forward a proposal that would meet every single answer to that to the survey results from back in 2019. I'll leave it at that, but any further dialogue you might have, happy to have it offline with you, Paul.
And I would also encourage you, Paul, just to provide your commentary when you fill in the survey by indicating, you accept the option as is, you don't accept it, and feel free to add specific commentary, and the more specific, the better, so that the township can go through that feedback specifically. The next part of his questions was, a major variance issue has been the 25% maximum width, 12.5 feet for a 50-foot lot, 25 feet for a 100-foot lot, and 50 feet for a 200-foot lot, all of which seem unreasonable. But are we okay with the 87.5 foot width on a 350-foot lot?
That's a detailed question, and I think that is a good question to consider. I myself did not look into dwelling width as an opportunity to potentially find a middle ground in regards to the gross floor area issue. I think dwelling width, the dwelling width provisions that are in the bylaw, and I myself had to assist a lot of residents through that process for a variance because, for instance, they did have an extremely narrow lot, and their dwelling width provision had to be, they had to request relief from that dwelling width provision. For larger lots, the 25% maximum, there is, sorry, I'm just going to open it here because I want to make sure I'm quoting it specifically or appropriately. Just bear with me here. So for properties that have an extremely large frontage in comparison to typical lots, the way that the provision is stated in the bylaw is that they can have a 25% of their total lot coverage or a maximum of 23 meters, whichever one is more restrictive. So that maximum 23 meters is there to make sure that the built form of an extremely or a larger property with a larger lot frontage isn't able to build out, for instance, like you mentioned in your question, all the way essentially to their side lot lines. So because that control is still in place through that or 23 meters portion of the provision, I didn't feel it was appropriate to bring that forward as an option. But again, through the survey, Paul, if you believe that that's something that should be looked at or considered in a different way, that would be great feedback to have.
The next part of the question was, did you consider simply 6% for building, excluding basement and covered portions, I'm assuming that meant, and then apply a maximum GFA and a maximum width and let the setbacks do the rest? The process is just too complicated.
I appreciate your comment of it being a complicated process. As someone who had to review building permits to the zoning bylaw, it can be tricky in some instances as township staff have to deal with that. I can't really answer your question specifically right now. I'll have to take a further look, and I did receive your written comments just before the meeting, so I do have them in writing, Paul, and I'll take a look and provide you a better, more comprehensive answer after the fact. I appreciate your patience. Thanks.
Okay, then the next part of the question was, do you feel that a landowner with a lot of 0.9999 of an acre and a landowner with 1.001 of an acre should be significantly different? In your terms, an additional bedroom at least.
That's a hard, and I absolutely can understand where you're coming from, Paul. And I recall having to correspond with a number of residents who had concerns about that when I was at the township, where, you know, they were just under, for instance, that threshold to get an increase in the GFA versus the, you know, the 275 versus the 190. And it was always a very frustrating thing for them to understand that their property is just under what the rules currently say. I think the intent of why the separation between the two lot area values were initially brought into place. Again, I was not involved during that time, but during my time at the township, I believe the general intent of why that was done is to just further try and constrict the imbalance of built form to lot area. I don't think it would be possible to be able to make it a perfect situation where that wouldn't impact a number of landowners that did unfortunately have just over or just under a certain value. I think regardless that situation occurs. But I do believe, it is my opinion, that is why, for instance, the variance process exists to be able to assist those people through that. And I do recall a number of applications moving forward, and that was always part of, you know, our justification, again, during my time at the township as staff of, you know, this person is X amount under the maximum lot, or sorry, the minimum lot area to get a bit more gross floor area. And, you know, in certain circumstances, it would make sense to support an application like that for them to get more. So unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where it will be fair for everybody. That's a roundabout way of trying to answer your question, Paul. But again, I'll look further into your comments in writing and see if I can elaborate in writing in due time.
Great, thanks, Victoria. The next question comes from Michelle P, who asks, is there any data on what the percentage of cottages on the lake are legal non-conforming, specifically within 20 meters?
Thanks for your question, Michelle. It's my understanding, but again, I would probably have to ask you to direct that question to current township staff. And maybe that's something that you could ask your counselor to find out from staff on your behalf. During my time at the township, I don't believe that there was any data that gave us specific value that we could say there's exactly X amount of cottages that were legal non-complying. I don't think an exercise like that has been done on 6 Mile, but I might be incorrect in my comment on the fly on that. So I would really encourage you to ask current township staff, and they can look into it for you if that data might now exist or did during my time there and I wasn't aware of it, unfortunately. Yeah.
Great. The next question comes from Jim, who says, since the proposed increases in GFA only really apply to cottages 20 meters back from the lake, would getting rid of the roof overhang, porches, basement, and attic ceiling height and other restrictions included in the GFA be beneficial to all landowners?
I believe it would. If the proposal ended up including modifying the definition of GFA to take away those areas, as an example, if we go back to contemplating 1,000 square foot dwelling that's, you know, within 10 meters of the water, if the definition of gross floor area was modified, that resident who has a cottage that's, let's say, 5 meters from the water, they would still be restricted by that 411 section, that 25% increase that I was mentioning before. But if the definition itself was modified to not include roof overhang, things like that, I do foresee, and again, I can't speak with certainty without knowing a specific, what someone would specifically want to do, but I could foresee that modifying the gross floor area definition would assist people that have legal non-compliant dwellings as well, because when they go and ask for that 25% increase, for example, to their existing gross floor area, they'll be able to add a bit more, they would be able to add a screened porch, for instance, so long as they still met the other criteria of that section, or they might be able to extend their overhang and have a covered entry, things like that. So I do foresee that the proposed change to the GFA definition would have a positive impact on everyone on the lake, regardless of the circumstance.
Great. The next question comes from Jamie Linson. Will the responses to the questions being asked live that will be answered in further detail at a later time be made available to the other participants or cottagers?
I think I'm going to probably push that back on members of the board.
Yeah,
to answer.
maybe I'll take that one. So any questions that we received today that we aren't able to get to, or that you email in within the next couple days, we will package those all up, work with Victoria on getting answers out to you. So look for an email coming from me with those answers. We'll share that with everybody so that you have the information that you need to make the best decision for yourself. Please, if you do have a follow-on question, the earliest you can get that to me, the better, so that we can package all of those up, work with Victoria and get you answers as quickly as possible. And we will do our best to get them out to you in the next few days. So then there is a question from Les Carter. Why is getting rid of GFA as a criteria not being considered?
Thanks for your question. Through the brainstorming session that we had and looking at the existing 6 Mile Lake plan, as well as the survey results, I was not in a position to support a proposal at this time as drastic as fully removing gross floor area without any further input from the community. I didn't believe that that was a reasonable approach based on the existing 6 Mile Lake plan. But I am aware that there's probably a number of members of the community who would like to provide that input. And it'll be really valuable information through the survey process to see how impactful that response is. And I appreciate you taking the time to provide that comment, and hopefully we'll do so in your survey response as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's
so
Les here. Appreciate.
No, sorry, go ahead, Les.
I appreciate all the good work that's been going on with this, but just sitting back here and listening to a lot of the questions and gauging, some of the angst around trying to present questions that would allow better clarity to allow people to plan what they would like to be able to envision. It's clearly this whole idea of gross floor area has thrown a real it's created a ton of confusion. It has certainly not made it simple. And gross floor area is not something that's been historically within the planning rules for this community. It wasn't there when I built my cottage 20 years ago. And it would, 20 years ago, I had, you're allowed this much frontal coverage, you're allowed this much height. Overall area of your footprint can't be above the following. It was a fairly simple way that people could envision being able to have an architect or coming up with their own design. Under today's rules, it has become an order of magnitude more difficult for anybody to try and figure out what is allowable and what is not. And as a result, they come up with plans that end up putting them into expensive processes for getting approvals. And so, you know, I think there are enough rules out there. We can simplify it, and there's no reason why, at least I can't see any reason why, removal of gross floor area as a criteria can't be put on the table for people to clearly have as an option, instead of making it essentially a negative option where they have to think about it. Yeah, I think it's appropriate, and I think it's I think especially given the survey feedback, the association is obligated to put that out as an option and to comment.
If I could just jump in, Les, the actual.
We're actually at time now.
We are.
And I want to give time for everyone to get on with their evening. Just wanted to touch on one piece of feedback that people had provided. There was a question about voting, specifically around if you're not in agreement with the options provided, or if you don't think there should be an increase at all, or if you want a different mix of options. So I just want to again clarify, the voting is either you accept the option that's presented or you don't. And if you don't, you can add as much commentary as you'd like to clarify, you know, what would satisfy your needs. So please feel free to fill the comment section out when you answer the survey. But I think, Harold, we'll leave it with you for your closing remarks.
Okay. Next slide. Oops, that's the wrong direction. There we go. Yeah, on behalf of the board, thank you everyone for coming out, and there's been an awful lot of very good conversation here and a lot to think about. Just a quick reminder that voting will be open for 2 weeks. So I think that was May 11th. And the recording of this meeting will be posted on the sixmilelake.net website tomorrow. So if you need to refer back to anything, please do that. Please vote and tell us what direction you'd like the township to take. It's vitally important that you vote with your heart and not let someone else tell you how to vote or whether you should vote at all. We'd like to remind you that the vote is not a referendum, but rather an opportunity to give weight or not to the ideas we put forward. If you didn't get an answer to your question tonight, or find you have a follow-up question you'd like to ask, please remember, you don't have to vote tonight. You have 2 weeks to vote. So send in your question and to info@sixmilelake.net, and we'll be sure to respond as best we can to provide you with the information you need so that you can vote with confidence. Excuse me. Also, just a reminder that there is no need to abstain from voting. If you aren't 100% clear on how the proposed changes will affect you, all you need to do is ask for clarification. There is a provision on the ballot for you to abstain from voting if that's what you want to do, but I have to warn you that an abstention merely indicates that you're not interested, and that ultimately an abstention is a vote for no change at all. The overwhelming response and attendance of this meeting tonight signifies to us that we're all ready to put this issue behind us. The discord has gone on for far too long, and it's time we all focus on more weighty issues like coming together in the spirit of peace and harmony and enjoying our cottage paradise together. So with that, I want to say thanks again and have a great evening.